everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Good afternoon, and welcome to Roots and Branches, developing a concert program based on cultural influences by Dr. Kathleen Nicole Fallon, Artistic Director of Atlanta Freedom Band. She holds an educational doctorate in music education with a trumpet performance minor from the University of Georgia. She has immense experience playing trumpet in the United States Army to teaching in public schools and even at the college level, serving as director of bands and trumpet professor at Augusta State University. With all that education experience, she has put together an absolutely superb presentation for you today. It is a pre-recorded presentation, so please make sure you stay on mute until the end so that everyone can hear it. On the right side of your screen, you should see a chat box with a Q&A tab. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions for Nicole, please click on the Q&A tab and enter those questions there. So without further ado, I present to you Roots and Branches, developing a concert program based on cultural experience.
Hi everyone. A few months ago, I was asked to prepare a workshop on how I go about researching a concert program based on African American music. Little did I know at that time how unfolding events over the next several months would make this program now seem even more timely. My purpose today is to share some of the processes and ideas that I would utilize to put together a program that is based on the music of African American composers, the African American experience in American society, and music that was created and grew out of the influences of the African diaspora. I last developed a similar program in 2017 with Kurt Wackerly, the assistant director of the Atlanta Freedom Band, and we titled it Roots and Branches, Celebrating African American Culture in Music. We feel that it was a successful program and one that both performers and audience liked. We focused on music by African American composers first, and then balanced that with the need to provide an entertaining program for our audience. The opening number, Fanfare for Freedom, is by Quincy Hilliard, a well-known African American composer born in 1954. This was followed by a concert band arrangement of Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn selections by Paul Murtha. Third in the program was a composition by Connor Sullivan, The Final Descent. We have an ongoing project in which we commission a piece by a student composer for every concert. Connor is a student at Kennesaw State University and has written several pieces for us. Next was Meditation by Dwayne Milburn, an African-American composer whom I first met in the Army some years ago. He is the former director of the Army Band in Washington, D.C., and has a number of really fine works for concert band. Next was Robert W. Smith's composition Africa, Ceremony, Song, and Ritual. Obviously not by an African-American composer, it was selected as an example of the ongoing influence of the African diaspora on contemporary composers and as a feature piece for our percussion section. Following intermission was an arrangement of a Scott Joplin rag by Jean Bourgeois. Reflecting the roots of American jazz, ragtime was a very prominent style of music created by African American musicians and composers in the late 1800s. Next was a movement from William Grant Still's Afro-American Symphony. William Grant Still is often referred to as the dean of African American composers, and can lay claim to a number of significant firsts for an African American in the orchestral world. Rounding out the program was a selection of Motown hits arranged by John Wasson. At the simplest level, I used three approaches to identify music for this program. Music by African American composers, music from one of the genres resulting from African American influences, music descriptive of the African American experience in American society. As is common for all of us, we continue to learn and grow, and current events can modify our perspectives. Recently, I have reevaluated my biases, prejudices, and stance regarding the failures of American society to address systemic racism. There is a heightened interest in the contributions of African Americans to our musical culture, and additional resources that are constantly being developed by scholars and other band directors. I am again looking forward to selecting a new Roots and Branches program for the near future. Furthermore, I do think that as an organization concerned about equality, we should assume a more active role in activism. if only by working hard to ensure the voices of all marginalized composers are heard. Since this presentation is titled Roots and Branches and deals with music that has been created by African American composers and musicians or influenced by the African diaspora, let's review some definitions of the term diaspora, followed by a brief discussion of those traditions. Merriam-Webster gives two related definitions of the word: people settled far from their ancestral homelands, and the movement, migration, or scattering of a people away from an established or ancestral homeland. The term diaspora is frequently encountered when researching the culture and music of transplanted populations. African diaspora, as applied to music, is the cultural influence of displaced Africans on the development of musical genres in their new homelands. Most writers cite the roots of African influence on American music as beginning with the arrival of the very first slaves to Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. From the onset, slaves began using music as a means of dealing with the harsh conditions in which they labored, and as a means of relaxation and rejuvenation on Sundays, the one day they were not required to labor. Slaves were often required to entertain the plantation owners as well, and many slaves developed impressive and highly valued skills and abilities on the banjo, fiddle, violin, French horn, and other instruments. The details of over 250 years of musical development in slave communities is far too complex to detail here, except to point out some of the traditions their musical practices were rooted in and the type of instruments that were in common use on the African continent at the time. Africans transported to the Americas as slaves brought no belongings with them. It's common knowledge, though, that the American banjo was derived from the chordophone types that African slaves knew about from the motherland, and fashioned in America as musical instruments. The point is, all the musical traditions and memories were not totally lost by slave communities in the Americas, and became an important part of their transplanted culture. The musical traditions in Africa during the 16 and 1700s was rich and varied. Music in African society was utilitarian and played an especially important role in all aspects of daily life, from the beginning of life to the end. There were traditional songs sung at birth and death, for a child's first tooth, music for attaining puberty and rites of passage, music for marriages, music for ceremonies celebrating the seasons, agricultural events, the crowning of new kings and leaders, music for honoring important visitors, teaching history, and music to prepare for war. There were traditional hunting songs, fishing songs, boating songs, and songs to accompany every type of labor. And then at the end of the day, there was music for entertainment. In short, music was everywhere. Most of these drawings are illustrations from the journals of early European explorers into the African continent. Professional musicians were held in high esteem in African society. These positions were often inherited and highly skilled. The musicians were often attached to the courts of rulers, and they could be seen seated with the official members of the king's household. Roaming professional musicians operated much like the Irish bards, and were referred to as griots by some historians and gilikia, or singing men, by others. Their performances were highly improvisatory and usually involved singing praises towards the person or persons listening. Traditional African musical instruments fell into four broad categories: membranophones, idiophones, aerophones, and chordophones. Again, going into much more detail is beyond the scope of this presentation, except to say, I believe it's an important part of your background knowledge to fully understand some of the possibilities for programming. I've listed several key resources elsewhere for further study. Now I want to look at 6 main sources of music for this program outside of band compositions by African American composers. In what would become the United States of America, there arose 6 main genres of music from the African diaspora: spirituals, ragtime, blues, gospel, jazz, rap, and hip-hop. For me, Lists like these are useful tools which give me an enormous number of possibilities and programming ideas for a concert. And though my preference might be to utilize only music by African American composers, I can also educate my audience to the far-reaching influences in American music the African diaspora has had. This obviously also includes the protest music that is activist in nature and appropriate for a concert theme dealing with equality and Black Lives Matter. In general, spirituals can be defined as Black religious folk songs. Well-known examples are My Lord, What a Morning, Steal Away, Go Down Moses, and Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. Originally an oral tradition based on the African practice of call and response, they also included coded lyrics and descriptions of the slave experience. Over time, they came to be notated, appropriated by white church choirs, and made popular worldwide by groups like the Fisk Jubilee Singers shown in the photograph on the upper left. There are many band transcriptions of spirituals as well as compositions based on spiritual melodies. One that I like is by Ayate Shabazz, The Quiet Journey Home, or His Eye is on the Sparrow. Ragtime first appeared in the early 1890s and was developed by African American musicians. It utilizes copious amounts of syncopation and was extremely popular and widely sold as sheet music for pianos through the early 1900s. The composer we most associate ragtime with today is Scott Joplin, though there are many others and literally thousands of ragtime compositions, any of which make fun transcription projects for band. Often the root melody is derived from folk tunes. But ragtimes also include compositions as diverse as coon songs, a popular music style of the late 1890s and early 1900s which was associated with racist depictions of African Americans. They also include dance music for cakewalks. For that reason, I advise exercising some cautionary research into associated lyrics and background of any music from this era. One particularly useful place to find these compositions is the imslp.org website. One really cute and easy arrangement of a rag is by Pierre Laplante called The Cat's Pajamas. As you can see, there are many types of blues, and furthermore, there are other ways to classify the blues, such as Delta blues, Chicago blues, Kansas City blues, and others. Let's just acknowledge that this is a genre rich in programming possibilities, ranging from Jack Stamp's Blues for a Killed Cat to the well-known standard St. Louis blues. Gospel grew out of the evangelical camp meetings and the holiness, Pentecostal, and sanctified churches' need for music that was highly emotional, energetic, and even improvisatory in nature. By the 1940s, through radio, early television, and recordings, as well as the arrangements of Thomas Dorsey, Theodore Fry, and Sally Martin, gospel spread worldwide and even into the mainline white Protestant churches of the day. One key component of gospel music that is just as important today, the performance of the music is more important sometimes than the music itself. There are quite a few beautiful settings of gospel tunes for vocalists and wind band. One I have recently fallen in love with is Luigi Zanninelli's His Eye is on the Sparrow. It goes without saying that jazz is an African American art form, and there are endless possibilities for programming from this genre which I won't belabor here. Just use jazz as a search term in any catalog such as J.W. Pepper, and you will turn up over 500 concert band pieces and arrangements by composers of every ethnicity and gender. Yes, there are programming possibilities here. I would point out that rap and hip-hop are as important American genres as jazz, and they will take their place in the classical repertoire of the future without a doubt, not only as masterful art forms, but also as a reflection of our society and examples of the protest music of our generations. This is the Michael Brown arrangement of My Shot from the Broadway show Hamilton. Although we tend to look towards contemporary composers and existing catalogs of music with those publishers and music distributors, there's a rich history of African American compositions for the wind band dating back to the late 1700s. Many of these pieces were written for bands of a different era and instrumentation, such as the small military band, but they are being researched and edited versions are starting to appear. During the 1800s, there were many African American military bands formed during the War of 1812 and then later, the Civil War. With them came well-known African American conductors and composers. The most famous example was Francis Frank Johnson. His first band was formed as the 3rd Company of Washington Guards in 1815. Over time, they became immensely popular and were in demand for social functions and dances around the Philadelphia area. They performed as the Johnson Celebrated Cotillion Band and other names, and many of Johnson's compositions are to be found at the IMSLP website, either for military band or as piano transcriptions, and they can also be found in the Library of Congress. Another very important development in the 1800s were African American brass bands of New Orleans, which served as important precursors to the development of jazz. The following composers I want to share with you are a sampling of many that were composing in the early 1900s. Alton Augustus Adams was educated and spent much of his life in America, serving in the United States Navy. In fact, he was the first African-American bandmaster in the United States Navy, and besides Warbling in the Moonlight, which we are listening to now, some of the marches he composed include Virgin Island March, Spirit of the U.S. Navy, and the Governor's Own. James Reese Europe was an extremely important African-American composer in the early 20th century. His army band toured Europe in World War I, exposing much of that continent to an early form of jazz, and upon return he played a significant role in the development of an African-American concert scene in the New York City area with his Clef Club and other activities such as his School of Music. Here we hear his Castles in Europe, arranged by Chandler L. Wilson. Nathaniel Dett was a concert pianist, composer, writer, and well-known educator. In fact, he led the Hampton Institute's choral program for over 20 years. Here we're listening to the piano version of his Cave of the Winds, written in 1902. Next will be a recent arrangement that's just been released. One very controversial form of entertainment that rose in the late 1800s was minstrelsy. It is rooted essentially in the mocking of African Americans by whites in blackface, and as such, an incredibly sad part of our history. In fact, a form of minstrelsy lasted until the 1970s with occasional appearances of white actors in blackface. I personally will never program a piece of music rooted in that tradition, and there are many. Speaking of this time, I want to point out one composer that has some particularly egregious compositions rooted in racism. Henry Fillmore published a book of 15 ragtime pieces called The Trombone Family. I personally believe you should refrain from programming them, especially if you are aware of the original titles and advertising for the sale of them. Instead, consider a piece that we're listening to, like Al Sweet's Trombone Rag. One of the positive outgrowths of minstrelsy is that over time, African Americans took the place of black-faced whites, and the beginning of a great African American theatrical tradition was born. Well-known African American composers of the early 20th century wrote pieces for the increasingly popular African American choral groups and the appearance of the African American theater companies and productions on Broadway. Early examples include The Origin of the Cakewalk by Will Marion Cook in 1898, which featured the first all-African American cast, as well as a Broadway musical called A Trip to Coontown by Bob Cole and Willie Johnson. Reputedly the first Broadway show written, performed, produced, and owned by African Americans. To my ears, and likely yours, the title is offensive. It reflects the negative stereotypes that surrounded blackface theater in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. It is significant, though, in that with the success of this production, Cole led the way to respectable presentations of African American actors in musicals and theatrical productions, and he moved away from the minstrelsy-style productions that were denigrating and racist. He foretold a day when African Americans would revolutionize the entertainment industry and longed for the day when racism would be nullified in American entertainment and culture. Here we've been listening to the Iowa State University Wind Ensemble, accompanying Simon Estes on Old Man River. Though not terribly prolific as a composer, it is hard to ignore the contributions that William P. Foster, the famous band director of FAMU for over half a century, made to music education and African American music. He composed several marches suitable for concert use, such as this one, his Marche Bruyante. William Grant Still is one of the most important American composers of the 20th century, and his use of jazz in orchestral and concert settings precedes that even of Gershwin and others. I will undoubtedly include more William Grant Still pieces on future programs. As we start to look at the late 20th century, there is an explosion of African American composers, and though it seems to me that many were focused on mediums other than the concert band, there are some real gems available. The composer I like most from this period is Adolphus Hillstork. He was my theory professor at Norfolk State University in the 1990s, so I guess I'm a little biased. His American Guernica is the major work written in remembrance of the September 15, 1963 firebombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, in which 4 young African American girls died. One piece that I am looking forward to hearing when life returns to normal is Michael Abel's newest piece, Falling Sky. It's a dance piece for concert band commissioned by Butler University. It was inspired by the immigration crisis, both as it plays out at the U.S. southern border and throughout the world. It was to have been premiered by the Butler Wind Ensemble in March of this year. You may recognize the name of Kenneth Amos as the tubist with the Empire Brass or Palm Beach Opera Orchestra. He's also tuba professor at the New England Conservatory and tuba professor and wind ensemble director at Lynn University. Additionally, he's an accomplished composer. Here is his Bell Tones Ring, a grade 4 piece, and then later, Driven, a fun grade 6 piece. Valerie Coleman has a double bachelor's degree in theory and composition and flute performance from Boston University, and a master's degree in flute performance from the Mannes College of Music. She has a number of works for wind band. Currently, she is on the advisory panel of the National Flute Association. This is her piece entitled Roma. Kataj Copley recently finished his bachelor's in music education and composition at West Georgia University. He is a very interesting and promising young African-American composer with a number of works in print already. One of his newest works, Infinity, was to have been premiered at Midwest this year. Here is his piece entitled Nova, written in 2019. Kevin Day is a composer, conductor, multi-instrumentalist, and native of Arlington, Texas. He is currently attending the University of Georgia, working on his Master of Music in Music Composition. He's a past winner of the BMI Student Composer Award and composed over 150 compositions, and has received numerous performances across the United States, Austria, Australia, Taiwan, and South Africa, as well as commissions for a wide variety of new pieces. In 2020, his works were debuted at Carnegie Hall as part of a New York Wind Festival. Here we've been listening to his Hymn for Peace. Among her many previous positions and appointments, Tanya Leon is currently Vice President of the Music Division of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She's founder and artistic director of Composers Now and a member of the Board of Directors of the New York Philharmonic. She has a number of works across all mediums. This is her piece entitled Allegre for Wind Ensemble. Major Dwayne Milburn is active as a composer, conductor, and adjudicator. He has received commissions from the instrumental programs at UCLA, the University of North Texas, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Dr. Milburn's choral and wind ensemble works are published by the Alfred, Kials, and Ludwig Masters Music Companies. He is currently serving as commander and conductor of the United States Army Europe Band. He is one of my favorites. Here is a movement from his American Hymn Song Suite. Sean Okpepolo is a two-time winner of the Kentucky Music Educators Association All-College Composition Contest and a three-time winner of Asbury College's Peniston Honors in Composition. He is a recipient of the Union University Pew Research Grant, a fellow with the National Bandmasters Association Young Composers Mentor Project. He's won first place in the Accent 06 International Composition Competition, the KMEA All-Collegiate Composition Contest, and has been an annual recipient of the ASCAP Plus Award since 2004. As a composer and arranger, he has written music for concert band, orchestra, and choir. He has also arranged a number of African American spirituals. Here is an excerpt of his piece entitled Rituals. You will hardly find a more prolific African-American band composer than William Owens. He's written nearly 200 commissioned and published works for concert band and string orchestra, and you are likely to hear a new piece of his every year at Midwest. Here is an excerpt of his holiday composition, And Bless Us Everyone, followed by his Carnegie Anthem. You've already met Ayate Shabazz. He's a graduate of the University of Southern Mississippi and has taught beginning through high school band. He holds memberships in ASCAP, the Recording Academy, National Federation of High Schools, and many others. I really like the piece you're hearing now. It's about the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, and it's entitled Of Honor and Glory. I've saved my favorite for last, and I doubt he really needs an introduction. This is an excerpt of Omar Thomas's Of Our New Day Begun. So there you have it, my mini tour of the amazing wealth of programming available for a program focusing on the music of African American composers and cultural influences. Now, for those of you who are still with me, here are a few details of the process of discovering these works that I employ. First, in my readings and listening, I make lists, lots of lists. One such list usually involves keywords related to the topic, and I use them to search catalogs. Here you see some of the terms and the number of hits in parentheses that resulted from the Pepper catalog alone. Here you see some of the music sources I search with those keywords: J.W. Pepper, Hebrew Music Verlag, Brian Music International, Bravo Music, Sheet Music Plus, and the Win Repertory Project website, looking for anything out of print that may have escaped me. I also individually research the bio and websites of each composer that has made my list for that particular topic or concert. In this slide, you see the search results on 3 different websites using the term Martin Luther King. J.W. Pepper turned up 12, but surprisingly, Hebrew revealed another 10 not on the Pepper website, and Brain Music still yet one more. Here's one more example using the search term African American. J.W. Pepper turned up 45 results in the concert band category, and Hebrew 37, and not all the same results either. These next 3 slides are useful websites for this project and potentially many others. The first is the Music by Black Composers website. Though not completely exhaustive, it is an excellent place to cross-reference your research and findings. The next website is the Afroclassical website. It lists composers of every nationality, primarily in the classical genre. Again, a useful tool to cross-reference lists. Finally, the Win Repertory Project website, which is constantly being added to and contains huge amounts of information related to the Win Band. One of the most useful are the links to composers' websites and the repertoire lists, even though they usually are not quite up to date. This last slide is also from the Win Repertory Project, and you can see the amazing resource it provides. This list contains Win Band composer categories from dozens of nationalities and ethnicities. Finally, I want to share how Kurt and I usually distill huge lists of possibilities down to an actual program. We maintain a shared Google document in which we develop programs several years out. As we think of possible themes, we create a new file, and over time, populate it with pieces that we discover that fit the theme. When we decide on a theme for a specific concert date, usually a year or more out, the real work begins. The list of possible tunes may grow to 50 or 100 or so as we research the idea. Obviously, we don't include every piece by every composer that falls within the topic. They first must pass muster in terms of difficulty, instrumentation requirements, length, and musical merit. Once on the list, they are provided with listening links, the piece's length, grade level, source, and cost. We also include fields for comments and other things pertinent to the piece. At some point, we have a phone call or two, hash out what feels good and what meets both of our approvals, determine the concert order, determine who is conducting what. After everything's put together and we have a program order, we let our marketing director and other people in the organization know what the program is so that they can put the knowledge of that program to work. That brings me to the end of this presentation. Hope you've gotten some useful information. When we finish this up, we'll have a brief question and answer session, and I'll be seeing you soon.
Hey everyone, we have 2 minutes left.
I apologize.
From the Q&A and chat, it seems like everybody thoroughly enjoyed the presentation. I know I did. Well, we have 2.5 minutes left. Are there any questions that anybody in the room has for Nicole while she can answer them?
By the way, if you're interested in a Google Doc that I've been working on, it's a spreadsheet that I can share with you of these pieces and many, many others and other composers, African American composers, and I'm willing to share it. It's still in development, but it's similar to that document that I showed you near the end. It's a Google Doc, a spreadsheet, and I just basically create a theme and start populating it with every composer and every composition that merits inclusion on it. And I'm willing to share that with anybody that's interested. Just email me. Okay. Yes, I'll send anybody that wants the link to the video. I'll share it. I can't post it publicly to YouTube because it violates a lot of copyright, and I'll get pinged. But I can keep it as a unlisted video, and I can share it with anybody I want. So yes, I'll share the link to the YouTube video.
From Nicole, everybody, congratulations to you. It was beautiful.
Oh, thanks, Brandon. Hope it didn't get too boring.
No, I think it offered a good mix of education, the video, presenting the pictures and slides and words along with the music in the background. So I figured for people who pay attention to different things, you can catch a big audience with one of those elements going on. So I think it was awesome.
Cool. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. So, and like I said, just email me and I'll share the links if you're interested. But I think it's going to be posted here anyway somewhere. So I think that's it. We have to. Oh yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Lee. Thank you.
So with that being said, for those interested, we have some more sessions after this one. If you have any more questions, Nicole provided her email, NicoleFowler@gmail.com. And everyone have a great day.
All right, everyone. All right, bye-bye.
All right.